Hello, I'm Canadian Proud, and I will show you how to make this cool, simple face rig. This is a mechanically simple face rig as it relies mainly on shape keys, bone-based rigging, and image sequences, and it is entirely functional in viewport mode, which is ideally the mode you should be animating in. This is not a beginner tutorial. I expect you to know how to model, texture, UV map, and make your own rigs in Blender before watching this tutorial. With that said, let's get started. Let's get into modeling first. The face mesh is not modeled onto the head, it is instead a separate object. First of all, you add a plane and you rotate it 90 degrees on the x-axis and you push it just in front of the head, and it should sit just above the head, but it shouldn't be clipping through the head. Then you would scale this plane to be about the size of the eyes. So at this stage, you don't have to worry about defining the shapes of the facial features yet, because right now we're blocking out the features and we're just determining the general form. Make sure that your origin is centered on the front of your character's head. Go into edit mode and then scale your plane to be about the size of your left eye. Then add the mirror modifier. Add a couple of edges to your plane so that you can fit the plane to match the curvature of your head. This is unrelated to the tutorial, but the character here that I'm working on is an OC that I have shelved for 2 years by now, and I want to bring him into my channel. His name is Haven, and he is a cloud. His design is currently unfinished, and I plan to finish his design probably by next month. Okay, back to the tutorial. Repeat the process for what you did for the eyes for the rest of your face. You want to scale your plane to be significantly bigger than the bounds of the mouth. The reason is, you need to make your mouth expressions after you created your planes for your face. So you need to make sure you have enough room on your UV maps so that you can fit those additional mouth expressions. Once you're done the mouth, do the brows next. If you have additional facial features that you want to model for your character, then go on right ahead. For Haven here, he only needs the brows, eyes, pupils, and mouth. So now that you're done with your blockout of your facial features, you can now start adding more detail to your planes. I used the knife tool to cut out the features of my eye. If I make a cut in the middle of a face, I would connect it to the nearest vertex. That way, if I need to make adjustments, I can slide that vertex along that edge. This helps keep the flatness of the face, because it will make the modeling and the rigging process easier. Once you're done with your cuts, make sure to connect any n-gons together. This will make your modeling process easier, and also make your curves look nicer on your planes. Before you further refine your plane, make sure to apply the scale of your planes if you haven't already. The reason being is that if you inset on your face without applying your scale first, then you'll notice that your edges will inset unevenly. So make sure you apply scale by pressing Ctrl A and selecting scale. Do this in object mode. Once you finish refining your planes, we can now start the UV mapping process. So first of all, make sure you apply any modifiers on your planes if you have any. Since I have mirror modifiers on some of my planes, I'll just apply them. So I go to the modifier tab, and while hovering the cursor over the mirror modifier, press Ctrl A. This way, it will apply the mirror modifier. Once you're done that, go into your UV editing tab. Create a new texture. Name it something. I'll keep the width and height as 1024 by 1024. Set the generated type to color grid. And then create new image. Now make a new material. Before you continue though, make sure that you go into your viewport shading and enable texture under object color. Now you can click the yellow dot beside space color, add an image texture, and add that texture that you created. Copy this material to the rest of your face meshes, and you're now ready for your UV mapping process. So for my UV mapping, I mostly just project from front view. So this will cause the texture to stretch when you look at the other angles, but I don't really bother about this too much. I'm mostly working with solid or simple gradient textures, so stretching doesn't really matter to me as long as the textures look good. So another thing that I suggest you do when you project your textures is that if you have a part of the face that is symmetrical on both sides, you can just mirror it. So what I do in the UV map is that I select one UV island and then I center the 2D cursor on that island. And then I select the other island and set its position to the 2D cursor. And then I go to the scale and scale it horizontally by a value of -1. So while I did say that I don't mind about texture stretching, for the mouth it does matter, because as I'm working on Haven's mouth here, I found that projecting from front view for the mouth actually stretches the texture horribly when you look below. So I used the other UV mapping options Blender provides me, and I just adjusted the UV map as I see fit to reduce any horizontal stretching afterwards. You should also be mindful about the texel density of your UV maps. While Blender doesn't provide you a tool to calculate the texel density of your UV islands, you should be able to eye it out. So texel density is the amount of pixels for a given surface, and generally I have more texel density for the mouth and the pupils compared to everything else, as that's where most of the detail will be seen. You can use the tiles that you see in your mesh as you make your UV maps to determine the texel density. When you're done, you can export the UV map as an image, which you can use to help with your texturing process. So I'd say the most important part of this tutorial is mainly how to model and rig this face, so I'm not going to cover texturing in this tutorial. You're pretty much on your own, and you'll likely find some resources online if you need help with your texturing. But I will give you this. So you should keep your main texture for your character and your mouth separate because you're going to be making an image sequence for your mouth, and you want that image sequence of your mouth separate from the rest of your textures. You should follow this naming scheme. You start with the name of your image, and then followed by an underscore 001. And every subsequent image that you add after that, you will increase the number. So from 001 to 002, 003, 004, so on and so forth until you made all the mouth expressions that you need. Once you're done, you can go back to Blender. You'll need to make a new material, and this material is what's gonna hold your mouth image sequence. Assign the mouth mesh to that material, and then you add an image texture. Then where it says single image, change that to an image sequence, and then locate the first image of your sequence into that image texture. Then you should turn on cyclic and auto refresh, and then you can manipulate the offset value and watch as Blender cycles through your image sequence. Another thing to note is that you need to make sure that your image sequences for the mouth have a transparent background. Anyways, that's all. The next step will be creating shape keys, and after that we can start rigging. So let's get to it. Start by adding shape keys for the face. Don't edit bases because bases is the original mesh, and the next shape keys after bases are what you should be editing. Also, make sure to enable shape key edit mode. As you do the shape keys for the eyes, you don't need to worry too much about the pupils clipping through the sockets. This is a technical limitation with this kind of face rig because I'm keeping the rig as simple as possible, so I'm not using any advanced object modifier stacks or shader nodes. So unfortunately, the pupils may have to clip depending on the design of your face. Although I just treat it more so as a stylistic choice, instead of a technical limitation. When you add a blink shape key, you can actually hide the pupils inside the head. So while you're in the shape key, you can push the pupils inside your character's head. This will result in a much cleaner blink, because you don't see the pupils stick out. So I didn't do this for Haven, but I have done it for my other characters, because I find that the pupils for the blink shape key still stick out too much. I'm not gonna do a lot more shape keys besides the 3 that I have planned for Haven for this tutorial, so it's up to you as to how many shape keys you want to add for your eyes for your character. Once you're done the shape keys for your eyes, you can then go on and do the brows. That is as much as what I'm gonna do for this tutorial though. Like I said, you can add more shape keys if you need to. And now for my favorite part, rigging. Yes, I do in fact love rigging. The rigging process will be broken down into multiple steps. We're gonna first do the deform bones, and then the mechanism bones, and lastly the control bones. So make sure your cursor is at world origin, and you add an armature. Go into edit mode, and position this first bone to the center of your head. This first step may not be necessary if you already have a rigged character, in which case you can use your rig's head deform bone. You can either add or duplicate a bone, and this second bone will be for the eyes. Place this bone in the middle of the eyes, and make sure it's in the front. When you name your bones, make sure the name matches the part that it's corresponding to. This bone is controlling the deformations of the eyes, so I'm naming it eyes_def.001. DEF meaning deform bone. Add another bone and place it in the center of the left pupil. Likewise, name this bone left pupil underscore DEF.001. Adding side prefixes like right or left will allow Blender to symmetrize the bones. You can find the symmetrize command in Armature. I have this on my quick favorite so I can easily use the command. Add 3 more deform bones. One for the mouth, one for the left brow, and one for the right brow. And likewise, name them accordingly. Okay, now it's time to parent these deform bones. Select the pupil bones and parent it to the eye bone. And then the eye bone should be parented to the head bone. And then the mouth and the brow bones should also be parented to the head bone. Now let's set up the weight paints. Parent the face mesh to the rig with empty groups. Use bone selection to quickly select and assign weights to your selected bone, and also enable symmetry. Assign weights to the parts of the mesh that correspond to the bone that you selected. The pupil bones will have 100% influence on the pupils. The eye bone will have 100% influence on the eyes, the brow bones will have 100% influence on the brows, and the mouth bone will have 100% influence on the mouth. Rename the current bone collection to DEF. Then make a new collection and name it as MCH. We're gonna make our mechanism bones now. Ignoring the head deform bone, duplicate the rest of the bones and move them to the MCH bone collection. Reduce the length of these bones by half. These mechanism bones still have the deform bone suffix, so I'm gonna batch rename them and replace the deform suffix with the mechanism suffix. Each deform bone will copy the transforms of their mechanism bone. To do this, go into pose mode, select the mechanism bone and then the deform bone, press Ctrl-Shift-C and copy transforms. Do this for all of the bones. I don't animate directly from the deform bones when it comes to rigs like this, simply because for this kind of rig, it is not as efficient. So I decided to do something different for this rig, and I think it would be cool to show you guys as well. This technique is meant to be used in conjunction with the Blender NLA editor and Action editor. On your dope sheet, bring up a new area. On the left side, change the editing context from dope sheet to Action editor. On the right side, change the editor type from dope sheet to nonlinear animation, otherwise known as the NLA editor. We're going to be making an action stash, and this stash will contain all the animations of our mechanism bones that determine their movement on our face rig here. And then we can later reuse this action stash in the form of a modifier called the Action Bone Constraint modifier. Now this is a really powerful constraint because instead of using drivers to drive the channels and likely using complex math equations to get the transforms that you want, you can just animate these bones, save them as a stash, and reuse them as a modifier. You can then use another bone or another property to drive the animation. So as far as the animations go, I only need to animate this bone if it needs to move this certain way. If it does not need to move in this other way, then I don't animate it. For example, when I was animating the eyes, I only had to care about it moving up and down, and nowhere else. So I only animated that part. This simplifies the rigging process, and it also saves you some time. From time to time I check my animation to see for any errors. I noticed that this mouth animation is clipping through the head, So I'm using the graph editor to also fix the animations and add some easing to allow for smoother animation so that the mouth mesh doesn't clip through the head. I keep the duration of each animation to be 10 frames. 10 is a nice and even number, and I can have frame 0 and 10 to be my extreme poses of my animation, and frame 5 will be the default pose because it sits right in between 0 and 10. This makes setting up the action bone constraint modifier easy. When I'm done an animation, I start the next animation on the next frame from my last animation. So when animating the pupils up and down movement, because they will clip past through the sockets, I don't have much choice for this, so I have to squish them as they go up and down so that they don't clip past the eye sockets. It may look weird, but once again, this is a result of a technical limitation, but also I just treat it as an artistic choice. You just gotta embrace the limitations sometimes. Once you're done, you can stash your action. In the action editor, go to action and click stash action. In the NLA editor, you should see your action be pushed down. Now you add the action bone constraint to all of the bones that you animated. Set the target to be your rig. Leave the bone slot empty for now, as we will deal with that later. Set the mix from before original to after original. In the action slot, put the action stash that you created there. What you're now gonna do is that you're gonna play around with the frame start and end values to match the corresponding animation to the corresponding bone. If you have multiple animations for the same bone, duplicate the modifier as many as needed, and change the frame start and end values to match the additional animations for that bone. Repeat this process for all of the other bones until you are done. Here are a couple of tips that may be of use for you as you do this process. Since you can't control your animation yet, you can check evaluation time and use the value slider to check your animation. And since the 5th frame of each animation section is the default pose for your bone, setting the evaluation time value to 0.5 should be your bone's default transform. You can click the eye on and off on your modifier to check if your bone's in its default transform. You can go back to the NLA editor, click on the action stash and press tab. This will bring back the keyframes which you can use to help you set the frame start and end values. If you need to see the animation though, you'll need to check the box besides the action stash so that you can play the animation. Yo guys, this music is so fire. Oh, I could listen to this all day. What am I even doing? This is... I'm sorry guys, I'm just breaking character for this tutorial. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm gonna go back to being normal now. I'm sorry guys. Fish and seafood. Fish and seafood. Meat. Fish. 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 Listen, 3D can be boring. That's why you need someone like me around. To entertain. To make your process less boring. As you can clearly see, I'm very funny. No, I'm not. I'm not funny. Oh. Alright, now it's time to set up the control bones. And we also need to set up the bone shapes as well. Add a new bone collection, and rename it to CTRL, which is control in short. Ignoring the pupil and brow bones, duplicate the eye and mouth mechanism bones, and move the bones forward. Rename the eye mechanism bone to look_CTRL. This will control the pupil movement. And change the suffix of the mouth mechanism bone to control. If you haven't already, move these control bones to the control bone collection. You can parent these control bones to your head control bone, not the deform bone. Also, I renamed the mechanism bones for the brows to control bones. So I replaced the mechanism suffix with the control suffix. I didn't need an extra set of control bones for the brow, so I just repurposed the mechanism bones to be the control bones instead. Add another bone that sits behind the look control bone, and name this as eyes_ctrl.001, and parent it to the head control bone of your rig. This will become the eye control bone, not to be confused with the pupil control bones. In case if you're confused, the eye control bone will control the movement of the entire eye, while the look control will control the movement of the pupils. If there are any bone constraints on these control bones, make sure to remove them. One more thing, the mechanism and control bones should not have the deform property on, so select all of those bones, go to bone properties, and while holding Alt, check off the box. Or after checking off the box, right click, and click copy to selected. Now it's time to assign or create bone shapes for this rig. I already have a set of bone shapes that I have made to use on all of my rigs. For this rig, the bone shapes that you'll need is a cube, 4 arrows pointing outwards, a concave oval, and some text. These should be pretty easy to make. I assigned the cube bone shape to the brow controls, and then the concave oval for the eye control, and then the 4 arrows bone shape for the look and mouth controls. Now that the control bones are finished, you go back to your mechanism bones and you go to the modifiers and fill in the bone slot to target the corresponding control bone. So I didn't finish setting up the action constraint modifiers for the mechanism bones here, but if you have already finished, you can go right ahead and target them to the corresponding control bone. Set the pupil mechanism bones to target the look control bone, set the eye mechanism bone to target the eye control bone, and set the mouth mechanism bone to target the mouth control bone. In the action bone constraint modifiers, change the channel in which the animation will be playing from to match the channel that your targeted bone will be moving in. So if your targeted bone is moving in the Y location, set the channel to the Y location. And don't forget to set your minimum and maximum range. Also, change the transformation space from world space to local space. I added a copy scale constraint on the eye mechanism bone that targets the eye control bone. I also added a copy scale and copy rotation constraint on the mouth mechanism bone that targets the mouth control bone. I set the copy rotation to only copy from the Z axis, because copying the X and Y axis rotation from the mouth control bone isn't necessary. There isn't much happening from here on onwards for the next couple of minutes, because it's just footage of me rigging Haven up. So if you want, you can skip right ahead to this timestamp shown on screen to go to the next part of the rigging if you're done, or you can watch the rest of this sped up time lapse if you want to see how I rig Haven. Alright, Final step, we need to set up the drivers for the eyes and brows shape keys, as well as one for the mouth image sequence. You're gonna add 3 control bones to the left of your character. You can place these in any order or arrangement as you want as long as they're off to the left of the character. One bone will be named brows_ctrl.001, the other bone will be named eyes_ctrl.001, and the last bone will be called mouths_ctrl.001. Assign the corresponding bone shapes to these bones. I already have text bone shapes for these, so I'm just assigning the text to these bones. Lock all of the transformation channels of these bones. In each bone, add a custom property. Edit each custom property and change the type from float to integer, and give it a name. When I named these properties, I took the name of the bone without the suffix and added offset. Set the default value to 0, set the minimum value to 0, and set the maximum value to be however many expressions you have minus 1. So if you have 5 brow shape keys, that means you have 5 brow expressions. So the maximum value would be 5 minus 1, which would be 4. And because 0 is the default value, that also means that your brows will be at their default expression. Alright, now let's start setting up the drivers. Let's do the brows first. Right-click on the Browse Offset property and select Copy as New Driver. Tab out of your armature and select your face mesh. Paste this driver on one of your brow shape keys. Right-click on the driver and select Edit Driver. Change the type from average value to scripted expression, and bring up a new area and change the editor type to driver editor. Now let's do a little math. Don't worry, this is not as complex as you think it is. With your shape key selected in your driver editor, go to modifiers and add a built-in function modifier. Make sure that the wave type is set to sine. Type in pi in the phase multiple, spelled as pi. In the phase offset, type in -pi divided by 2, and set the value offset to 0.1. Then add a limits modifier, and check off the boxes minimum x and maximum x, and set the minimum x value to 0 and the maximum x value to 2. Now copy this driver and paste this to the next brow shape key. Make sure you have the second shape key selected in your driver editor. Flip the sign of the phase offset and add one more to both the minimum x and maximum x value. Copy this driver and paste it to the next shape key, and repeat this process until you are finished with your brow shape keys. Repeat all of these steps for the eyes. When you get to the mouth, this whole process is no longer necessary. Just copy the property as a new driver and paste it directly onto the phase offset. And now I think it's a good time to say this. Your mechanism and control bones should not have any influence on the mesh deformation. So select all of your mechanism and control bones, go to the bone properties, and make sure that the deform property is off. And that's pretty much it as far as rigging goes. Your rig is done and should be functioning properly. You can continue watching this time lapse if you want to see me set up my drivers, if you need a better understanding. Otherwise, you can skip ahead to this timestamp if you want to see a short demonstration on how Haven's rig works. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, concerns, or feedback that you wish to give me about the rig or how I made this tutorial video, feel free to sound off in the comments. Hopefully this rig gave you an idea on how to make your own face rigs. So the rig that I showed you how to make in this tutorial is actually a bit more basic than the face rigs that I use in my characters. And that's because I want you to figure out how you can build off from this rig. Basically, I taught you the fundamentals of how to make this simple rig, and it's up to you how to expand on it. I believe that it's important to experiment on your own like this because that's how you are able to really push your rigging skills through these aha moments.
Subscribe for more. Oh.
You know what that means? Fish!